everyone, I'm a little bit late getting to this story, but finally, a feel-good story for those of us who are liberty lovers. Headline out of Global News, Nanaimo woman wins court challenge over forced breathalyzer test hours after driving. It's being reported by Richard Zussman, online journalist based at BC Legislator Global News. This was originally reported May 28th and updated May 30th, 2019. A Nanaimo woman says her rights have been violated because of new federal drunk driving provisions. Lee Lowry says she was recently at her sister's home in Maple Ridge when she received a call from the RCMP stating they had a very personal issue they needed to speak to her directly about. She assumed it was a family emergency and invited them into the home. They said there was a personal issue they needed to speak to me about. I immediately thought something had happened to a family member, Lowry said. Lowry and her boyfriend had traveled to Maple Ridge en route to pick up his children in Williams Lake. On the way to her sister's house, the group stopped at the local pub for lunch. They each had one cocktail with the meal and headed home. When they arrived home, they sat by the pool and had a few beers without any plans to leave the house that day. The police arrived home about 2 hours after they got home. Under the federal government's roadside provision, police are legally allowed to request a breathalyzer without any signs of impairment. The test can be requested within 2 hours of a driver being on the road, even after someone has returned home and had alcohol to drink. So completely unconstitutional and illegal by any definition of what legality or having constitutional rights even means. And to deny that is, like I say, to suggest that you don't live in a free country. You live in a country where political edict rules the roost. Lowry failed the breathalyzer test even after explaining to the RCMP that she had been drinking for a couple hours. The RCMP were not willing to let me prove the amount of alcohol I had consumed at home. I even invited them in to see the empties, Lowry said. It was like living in a communist country with no rights. Truly, I felt violated. I know the feeling, lady. I really do. Lowry was issued a 90-day license suspension and 30-day vehicle impoundment. She was also required to take a driving course. On top of that, she had to figure out how to get home to Nanaimo, and her boyfriend's kids were stuck in Williams Lake. So once again, in Canada, you're presumed guilty, and as a consequence, will feel the heavy hand of the law come down upon you, long before you've ever stepped foot in a courtroom to prove your case. That's how far out of touch the laws in this country are in terms of recognizing and acknowledging our inherent and supposedly inalienable rights and freedoms. But once again, that's all open to interpretation and subject to the political whims of the ruling class in this country. If they decide or determine that they can override and overrule what it is to be free in this country, well, you just got to get on board and go along to get along. Because, hey, you chose to make these people your authority. I didn't. Unfortunately, I have to suffer the same consequences as a consequence because we live in a democracy. And if you chose to give these people that much power over yourself and me, well, there's not much I can do about it. That's the problem with being an individual. You will always be overruled and outnumbered by the majority of the mob. Which is why I've never been a fan of democracy or majority rule. Because if there's one thing I've definitely understood, is people who genuinely understand what freedom and liberty entails, it's not representative of the majority. It's usually a very small minority. Lowry eventually won her case in court, but she will never get back the expenses she had to pay, nor the legal fees. In total, Lowry says the ordeal cost her about $3,500 in total with lawyers' expenses, travel, taxis, and vacation hours. This was devastating to my livelihood, Lowry said. I have never had a traffic violation in 25 years. It was horrible. Global News has reported extensively on the issues with the federal government's new rules. Anyways, folks, I'll place a link to this article in the description of the video below. But once again, I mean, at least this lady was fortunate enough that she could take taxis. It cost her money. But think about someone like myself. When I was going through this exact same, or at least not the exact same, but a situation similar to this, where I was being arbitrarily charged with impairment, when in reality I was not, but because the rules now are set up to, they just have to perceive that you're impaired. It's all political edict these days. Now, me being a truck driver, where my actually livelihood rested and relied on my license for my occupation, and the fact that my house is in a rural part of New Brunswick, 1 hour outside the city, where you don't have buses or taxis that you can take advantage of in the interim where you're going through this process. No, I lost out on my entire livelihood on my career as a result. So this lady was actually much more fortunate than I was, but I still feel bad for her being placed in this kind of situation. Because, like I say, I know very well with firsthand experience what this woman has had to go through. And it's like living hell on earth, I got to tell you, folks. And until you've done so or had to go through that kind of ordeal yourself, don't judge people based on the kind of rhetoric espoused by those who are your thought leaders or opinion makers in this country. Walk a mile in a man and woman's shoes before you choose to judge them. Because at least at that point, where you'll be in at least some kind of a position where at least some kind of legitimacy may actually exist. But if you're just going along with the kind of rhetoric or propaganda espoused by your thought leaders or those who are representative of Mad Canada or the authoritarian ruling class in this country that like to use a one-size-fits-all approach in terms of issues such as impairment or driving in this country, well, you're just creating and contributing to the downfall and the further slide into authoritarianism that is what Canada has now turned into. And that's nothing to be proud of by any stretch of the imagination. It's Canadian Libertarian, and I love liberty.